Hi, everyone. Greetings from the National Archives. I'm so excited to connect with you all today to talk about American women and the vote, especially since today marks the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. I'm very excited today to share resources and primary sources from the National Archives that will help us discover how women fought for the 19th Amendment and the right to vote leading up to and beyond the passage of the 19th Amendment. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So here's an exterior photo of the National Archives in Washington, D.C. This is where we have the 19th Amendment today. The National Archives preserves and protects the historically valuable records of the United States government. And so these records we can use to tell the story of how women fought for this amendment. So I'm really excited to share some of these primary sources with you all today. And today's going to be interactive. I'm going to ask you some questions, ask you to help me analyze some primary source documents, and then we'll discuss these records today. But let's take a closer look inside the National Archives. You can see we've got the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. We're going to connect these founding documents to our discussion today as well. When I say suffrage, we are talking about the right to vote. We should start off with some basics. Who decides who votes? Well, if we go back to the Constitution, as it's drafted in 1787, it did not specify eligibility requirements for voting. It left that power to the states, so the states could decide who voted. However, the federal government can pass laws and begin the process of amending or changing the Constitution to protect or give the right to more people. So both of these ideas are important in our discussion today about the 19th Amendment. And we also can connect this discussion back to we the people, those opening lines of the Constitution, because the 19th Amendment is a part of that story to make we the people mean more people. Well, why couldn't women vote in the first place? Well, at first in the United States, voting is limited to property-owning white men. And there were perceived differences between men and women, and many people believe that these differences meant that men were meant to govern and to work, and women were meant to tend the home and the family. There's a belief that voting would interfere in women's responsibilities at home. But not everyone believed that just because women were different from men in some ways meant that they weren't able to do the same things that men could do. They believed that women could and should have a say in government, and that restrictions on their participation were unfair. And they believed that voting was an important tool for battling other inequalities. They wanted to have a say in how they were governed. So today we're going to look at this fight for women's suffrage, but it's also important to keep in mind that as this fight is unfolding, there are other big changes happening too. There is work to abolish slavery in the United States with the 13th Amendment, to extend citizenship to all those born in the United States with the 14th Amendment, and to extend the right to vote to African American men with the 15th Amendment. So as all these changes are happening, the women's suffrage, the fight for women's suffrage, is also unfolding and is a part of this story too. All right, let's dive into it. Why did women even want the right to vote? Well, I want to hear from you. Why does having a say in government matter? What types of decisions does the government make that impact your life? Take a moment, if you're joining us today, to use that chat box. Send me a couple of ideas from your perspective. Why does having a say in government matter? So I'll give you a moment to think about this question, or if you're watching today with other people, you can discuss amongst yourself, but I'm curious to hear from you all. Oh, great, I see some great responses coming in. we get to have a say for how much money we pay in taxes, right? And what those taxes actually fund, how they impact our life. That's great. Government can make decisions about issues that are really close to you, like going to school. It makes us part of that decision process versus being told. If you can't vote, no one knows what you would like to happen, and it wouldn't be fair. These are great examples, and we can see some of these reasons echoed in the work of women and men fighting for women's suffrage. Thank you so much for sharing with me today. Let's take a look at the voice of one woman as an example. This is an example of a petition from the National Archives. This woman's name is Emily Barber. She is writing to the Senate and House of Representatives. Now, I put a little transcription next to this document since it's a little faded and a little difficult to read. I want you to take a moment, read that description. Can you find out why Emily wants the right to vote? You think you found Emily's reason, you can send it in the chat box too. Petitions are a way we can let our government officials know about changes we want to see made. They're a way for us to show our support for legislation. They are an important way to participate in government. So we have lots of petitions at the National Archives from women who are fighting for a suffrage amendment. Oh, great. Thank you for sharing some responses. We've identified some reasons why Emily wants the right to vote. There are a couple of reasons. She pays equal taxes on the same amount of property as men, but she doesn't get a say in how those taxes are spent. So it kind of echoes that idea of taxation without representation. One of the grievances we had against King George in the Declaration of Independence, we can connect it back to that founding document we saw at the beginning today. And as someone pointed out, she is paid 1/3 of the wages less than a male teacher at the same school, even though she is a great teacher. And so voting can help people have a say in issues that are personal to them. And we can see that in this letter. It's not just an issue about wanting the right to vote just to be equal. It's because when you have the vote, you have a voice in decisions that impact you. So petitions are great to discover some of the personal reasons that motivated women to fight for suffrage. And this is just one example of how women and men organized to fight for the right to vote. So next we're going to look at some examples of how do we win the right to vote. So when we talk about suffragists, we're talking about women and men who are fighting for the right to vote. And there are a couple of strategies that happen here. And this goes back to the discussion we had earlier about who decides who votes. Some suffragists are going to focus on changing state laws. Some suffragists are going to focus on amending the Constitution. So since we're the records of the National Archives, the federal government, we're going to focus on that amendment story today. But it's important to note that at the same time, there are suffragists working for states to change their laws, and we can see this unfolding too. So you can take a look and see if you can find your state as one of the early states to extend suffrage to women. But again, since we're going to focus on that federal amendment story, since our records here at the National Archives lend itself well to showing how that story happened. What are some other ways? This is a question for you all. What are some other ways you can make your voice heard beyond voting? Awesome, seeing some great responses coming in. Protests. Newspaper articles. Absolutely. Facebook. Yeah, today we have access to a lot of tools our suffragists at the time did not have access to. Meeting with a representative in person, letters, calls to our Congress. These are fantastic examples of how even if you cannot voice your vote, there are still ways you can raise your voice and you can draw attention to issues that are important to do. And we can connect Some of these, we can connect some of your ideas back to another important founding document, the Bill of Rights. You can exercise your rights. There's no age requirement, right, on exercising our rights. So if we look at the First Amendment, it outlines what we know as, right, our 5 freedoms. And 4 of these are going to be particularly helpful to suffragists in the fight for an amendment to extend suffrage to women, including freedom of speech, which we've mentioned in the chat today, freedom of the press, freedom to peaceably assemble, and freedom to petition the government, like Emily Barber did in that letter that we looked at. So I'm going to share some more images and documents with you all, and I want you to think about, okay, what are we seeing here? How are women fighting for the right to vote? Through petition, through a peaceful assembly or a protest, through speech, through press. So let's see if we can figure it out together. All right, let's just start by taking in this image together, using that chat, or if you're in conversation with people watching this presentation together, what are some details that you observe? What details stand out to you in this photograph? The big sign, excellent. Yeah, it's hard to miss that big sign. There's a fire. The White House, awesome. Let's talk about that fire. Any ideas why there's a fire there? Are there any other clues in this photograph that tell us why these women might have a fire? Cold, yeah, what else do we see that tells us that it's cold out? We've got, right, we can see the trees in the background are missing their leaves. These women are fairly bundled up, absolutely. So you can imagine if you put yourself in this photograph, what it might feel like to be standing outside the White House at this time of year, what it might smell like, thinking about that fire right there. And then we've got, someone noticed the White House. Yeah, these women are making a statement, and we can learn more about their statement by taking a look at their sign. They're also carrying, I think some of us noticed this flag. This is a flag that women adopted for the suffrage movement. We can't tell the colors from this black and white photograph, but it was purple, yellow, and white. And their sign is saying, President Wilson is deceiving the world when he appears as the prophet of democracy. He opposes those who demand democracy for this country. He's responsible for the disfranchisement of millions of Americans. So these women have a message for President Wilson. They're trying, and by standing in front of the White House, they're trying to draw attention to the fact that women in the United States cannot vote, do not have a say in government, even at the same time as when this photograph was taken. President Wilson, this is around the same time as the end of World War I, President Wilson is advocating for democracy in other countries. Someone mentioned the 14 points in the chat, great connections, but they're making the case that Wilson is saying all these things about democracy, but at home, American women cannot vote. So they're pointing out that contradiction and drawing attention, right? By making this public protest in front of the White House, they're drawing attention to this. Women, these were known as silent sentinels. They were organized by the National Women's Party. This was seen as a pretty bold step. Not everyone agreed with this strategy, especially as World War I was happening. They were worried about this statement that these women were making, but women were willing to stand in front of the White House 6 days a week. Some women were arrested. Their treatment later caught the attention of newspapers and added more attention to their cause for this amendment to take place. Great job, everyone. All right, let's take a look at another way women and men fought for suffrage. All right, and there's a close-up of that sign. What type of document do we have here? A petition, yes, it does say petition at the very top. This is another example. We saw one of Emily Barber sending us a letter from just her. This is a petition collecting signatures. In fact, the top 2 signatures are signed by Frederick Douglass Jr. and also Mrs. Rosetta Sprague. These are Frederick Douglass's children. Frederick Douglass was huge activists involved in the abolition movement, in the women's suffrage movement. His children carry on that activism. And if we look at this petition, we are seeing it is being sent to the Senate and the House of Representatives. So all of those signatures were collected in their community and sent to Congress to make the case for suffrage, for an amendment to the Constitution that would extend suffrage to women. So we can see how not just staging protests, but we can also use petitions, collect signatures, show strength in numbers to make the case for a change. Now today, petitions can even be completed online, but this shows us that at this time, this is around 1878, 1879, someone would collect the signatures of different people in their community and send them in to show support for these changes and to get Congress's attention to these important issues. There's a picture of Frederick Douglass. All right, let's take a look at our next document. What type of document is this? And I'll zoom in so we can get a closer look here. How are suffragists fighting for suffrage with this type of document? See if there are any details in the heading that tell us what type of document this is, where it's from, who created it. Okay, maybe it could be a pamphlet, perhaps a leaflet. Great, we've got some sort of paper document here. Any other details we can find? Thinking about when we analyze a document, maybe where it's from, who created it. Good, it's from Boston. Got an article here too by Henry Blackwell. It's also from the Office of the Women's Journal. So this is published by, this leaflet, as we identify, is published by the Women's Journal. So we're also seeing, right, a newspaper article. Okay, a good note too that this might be a paid subscription, so maybe not everyone has access to this, but this idea of using the press, of being able to print your message and distribute it to more people is another way we can connect it back to the Bill of Rights, using that freedom of the press to draw attention to your cause. So in this case, Henry Blackwell, another leader from the abolitionist and another abolitionist and suffragist, is making the case, for women's suffrage here. He's in this article, he's going through all these different arguments that have been made against women having the right to vote and countering them. So he's kind of setting up the arguments and then responding. We can see in this first one, here we have a quote from the Declaration of Independence again. And this idea from these founding ideas that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Taxation without representation is tyranny. So connecting it back all the way to those ideas that led to the United States becoming its own nation, and that women should also be included in these ideas. All right, let's take a look at our next document together. Again, we'll just start off with some photograph analysis. What details stand out to you? What can we find here? So I'll give you a moment to take in all the details. You can use that chat box. More signs, yes, absolutely. Some horses, yeah, we've got pretty dramatic horse at the front. Lots of people, lots of women dressed similarly. Awesome attention to detail. Anyone recognize what building that is in the background? US Capitol, fantastic. We've got a parade. Fantastic, everyone. You're picking up on some great clues. So, okay, another example of how we're fighting for the right to vote. We're leading this march in 1913. This is another big statement, right? A march in the nation's capital, 1913. This is before President Wilson's inauguration. We are demanding an amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Here at the front is Inez Milholland on this horse making this very dramatic statement. So we can get another clue into how women are fighting for suffrage, right? A right to peaceably assemble and play here. However, whenever we look at a photograph, it's also good to ask questions, right? Because a photo only gives us one glimpse into a historical event. It doesn't tell us the full story. So we're going to look at some other stories that surrounded this march together. So it looks fairly organized here, but let's take a look at our next photo. How would you describe what you observe in this photo now? Okay, almost like a flash mob. Yeah, we can see a lot of people. And if we look at the parade route, it's pretty narrow in some places. It almost looks like the crowd is crushing in. 5,000 suffragists from across the country participated in this march down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. But at points, they faced harassment from the crowds. There was intimidation. In some places, it became a little physical. Later, there's actually an investigation into the treatment of these of the women who participated in this parade by Congress. It's just why we have some of these photos from that investigation. So we can learn a little bit more like how this march actually played out by looking at additional resources. Yeah, think about what it must have been like to march down the street. Not the courage it may have taken, not sure what you were going to find. There's some other details about about who participated in this march that we need to learn from pulling in additional research. For example, Mary Church Terrell marched with the Delta Sigma Theta sorority of Black women that was founded at Howard University in 1913. She was an honorary member. She was also the founder of the National Association of Colored Women. And so she is going to join in members of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority march. However, march organizers make the decision that all African American women are going to need to march at the back of the parade. There is a concern, there's a discussion to even ban the participation of Black women from the beginning. There is this fear that some white women won't march if Black women are allowed to participate. So the same prejudice and racism that leads to Jim Crow laws and segregation in the South is also present in the women's suffrage movement. So these women are made to march at the back of the parade, but they participate in this big statement. Ida B. Wells Barnett, leading suffragist from Chicago, does not want to do this. So she waits alongside the route of the parade and then jumps in to march with her fellow suffragists from Illinois. And then another story we can find by doing more research into this march is that of Marie Louise Bottineau Baldwin. Marie Louise Bottineau Baldwin was a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. She was appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt to the Office of Indian Affairs. She got her law degree in 1912. She's going to march in this parade with her her other female lawyers. They're going to join in this parade. And she remembers walking at some point. It was so tight. It was like walking. It was no wider than a single car track. So it adds to some of the intensity it must have felt like to participate in this march. So these are important stories to this women's suffrage movement, and just a good reminder to us when we look at a photograph to always think about what else can we find out? What more can we learn about this particular event? Can we consult firsthand accounts reporting on the event? Where can we go for more information? Right, so the fight for women's suffrage unfolds across several decades. We saw petitions from the 1870s. We see parades and protests today from the 19-teens. And all of this is leading up to an amendment that's going to require, according to the Constitution, 2/3 of Congress to approve it, and then 3/4 of the states. And this is difficult to achieve. The first time the suffrage amendment is proposed in Congress is 1878, but it's not until 1919 that it finally gets some traction. So when we look at what the document we refer to as the 19th Amendment, this is the joint resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution to extend the right to suffrage to women. So it is on this date in June 4th, 1919, when the House of Representatives and the Senate both approve this amendment. But then the fight isn't over. It has to go to the states. And state legislatures have to vote on this amendment. And you need 3/4 of the states in order for the amendment to officially become a part of the Constitution. So here are just a couple of examples from our holdings that show the state ratification papers. So we have one here from the state of Minnesota. We have one here from the state of Wisconsin. The battle rages on. Some states do not approve the amendment, other states do. Then in August of 1920, it comes down to Tennessee, and will Tennessee approve the women's suffrage movement? And it's a very exciting story. It's outside of our holdings, but I encourage you to look it up later. But eventually Tennessee approves this amendment that will become the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And so the last document we have here is the Tennessee ratification, which happened on August 18th, 1920, 100 years ago today. So let's take a closer look at what the 19th Amendment actually does. So the right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States on any state on account of sex. This is huge, but it's not going to extend the right to vote to all women, because while it's going to prevent states from discriminating on account of sex, as we know, after the passage of the 15th Amendment, states are going to put other racist and discriminatory practices in place to limit voting, such as the poll tax, such as inaccessibility, such as a poll, such as literacy tests. So the fight for suffrage is going to continue beyond the passage of the 19th Amendment. So it's important as we look at this anniversary of this document did not extend suffrage to all women. Millions of women could vote in certain states before the passage of the 19th Amendment, and millions of women after its passage still could not vote and had to continue that fight for those rights. And they're going to use those same strategies we've been talking about today, right? Using your freedom of speech, using protest, using the press to try to make a change. So for one example, we can see in this petition from Lula Murray to President Calvin Coolidge, dated to 1923, in this petition, Lula Murray explains that she's gone to vote, she's been denied the right to vote, which is afforded to her through the 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments. Not only that, her family has worked for the United States abroad, serving during World War I, but still she cannot vote. And so it's stories like Lula's, these ongoing efforts to continue to extend suffrage to more women, and also to include more women and more people in our understanding of who is a citizen. So this just gives a handful of examples of some critical pieces of legislation and other amendments that play a role in extending suffrage to more people, including the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which is going to extend the right to vote to millions of more people. Right, it's all part of this story of we the people, of this government of the people, by the people, for the people. And we can continue these discussions today as you consider own conversations you're having around voting rights, who should be able to vote, who decides who votes in your own life. And as we wrap up today, I just want to share a couple of ways to keep the conversation going after today's program, especially as we think about this anniversary, the centennial of the 19th Amendment. So consider asking a family member or friend, ages 18 or older, if they remember the first time they voted in an election. Why does voting matter to them? Learn about why voting is important to the people in your life. Then another thing you can think about too is we saw just a handful of examples of women participating in this fight for suffrage. We know you may have studied already in school some of the leading suffragists who worked to accomplish this task. This is truly an effort that's successful because of women working that span decades, that span across states and territories to try to attain the right to vote. So think about, where could you go to learn more about suffragists who worked for suffrage in your state? When did women in your state get to right to vote? And that could be a fun place to jump off and do some research as you think about the centennial of this 19th Amendment. And then I also just want to do a quick plug for our archives.gov/women. This is where you can find all of our upcoming programming as we commemorate the centennial of the 19th Amendment at the National Archives. We have some other exciting events planned in the coming week. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation today. It has been so fabulous to connect with you all. You did a wonderful job responding to these documents, and I do appreciate your participation. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us, Katie, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
Well, have a great day, everyone. Thank you.